Welcome everyone to Beyond 99 Red Balloons, a pragmatic guide to alternative text. I'm Amanda Frederick. I'm the Program Communications Manager with Women Who Code, and I have the pleasure of introducing AmyJune Hineline, who will be presenting with us today. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about her so you can know some of her background. AmyJune is the Senior Community Manager at opensource.com, a project supported by Red Hat. She is also a Drupal core mentor. With a dual focus on both open source community development and inclusivity, she is uniquely positioned to help individuals become more comfortable and confident as they contribute to their communities. She co-organizes various open source camps and conventions globally, empowering individuals to forge deep community connections that benefit the whole. As a self-described non-coder, AmyJune helps communities discover how they can contribute and belong in more ways than code, which is really exciting. So we're super excited to host you. If you have any questions for AmyJune during the presentation, please post them in the chat and I'll moderate them toward the end of the workshop as well. And just by way of reminder, there is closed captioning as an option if anyone needs that. So thank you so much and welcome, AmyJune.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I like to start with a little bit of housekeeping. I do have the link to the slide deck in the chat, but I had some permissions issues because I work for Red Hat and we have this lockdown system. And then when I copy and pasted it into my own, the formatting is different, but all the information is there and all the pictures are there and all the links are there. It just looks slightly different than the slide deck I'm presenting. And the reason I share it is because we only have a limited amount of time, but there's a lot of information in the slides. And so I give links that you can figure out some of that stuff on your own. This is a presentation with lots of images. Normally I would describe images or I would tell you that the images did not have any value or add any context. So there's going to be a mix because it's a workshop about alternative text. There's going to be a mix of me describing some images and then not describing others. But you'll understand why that is as we go along. And then there are captions, like she said. She gave me a good introduction, so I don't need to introduce myself again. LinkedIn, it's Volkswagen Chick. There's going to be a slide at the end if you want to connect. Very important here. This is Spot. He goes by Spotty McSpots a lot. He does a lot of coding with me. He lays on my space bar. So if there's any extra stuff in the slide deck, we'll just blame it on him. So what are we going to talk about today? I don't want to assume anyone's knowledge base. So I want to talk a little bit about what is accessibility. That way people have some context. So I'll briefly describe some terms and definitions, but that slide deck I shared, there's links to more information, if I didn't give enough. I'll go over the different image types. We'll talk about different alternative examples. And then if there's time, because I talk a lot and I get so excited and I go off on tangents. If time allows, I'll go over how to have more accessible images in your social media and do an overview of slideshows. But if I don't get into it, that slide deck link will have those extra slides. So terms and definitions. There are so many international web accessibility laws and guidelines. And this is a global convention, so I just didn't want to stick with, United or North American centric laws and guidelines. So if you go to that bit.ly link, like I said, you can click on all of these and find out more. And they come from that bottom link at the bottom, commonlook.com, International Web Accessibility Standards. WCAG or WCAG, WCAG, this was brought to us by the World Wide Web Consortium. And it was really developed to normalize how we measure accessibility standards. And that WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's with the goal of providing a single shared standard for web content for those people that need it. It meets the needs of individuals, organizations, and governments. And throughout the world, many countries, including the US, reference these guidelines when establishing their own criteria. And with saying this, I want to tell you that accessibility is something that's always moving forward. And right now, the WCAG guidelines are in flux, and there'll be a new set of them next month, I believe. And these were built for not only web content developers, but our people who develop our tools, the evaluation tool developers, and then, like I said, anyone who needs or wants that standard for accessibility. And those guidelines are broken down into different levels. You've got the A, the AA, and the AAA. And the reason I talk about these is because images fall under an array of accessibility criteria. The A is minimal compliance that we have to meet for our digital assets. It means that your website, if your website doesn't meet this level, it's really hard for not just disabled people to use, but for people to use in general. We move up to that AA, and it's an acceptable criteria level. And it means that most people who visit your website or digital assets find it usable and understandable. And then that AAA, that's that optimal compliance. And this means that your digital products are accessible to the maximum number of users with or without disabilities. This AAA level really indicates that highest level of usability. So some of the guidelines that we talk about when we talk about images, and I'm not going to go over these because you can read about them. But really, these success criteria are really meant for people who are blind or have low vision, people who are using assistive technology. And remember that this is not only screen readers and your keyboard, but a mobile phone can be considered assistive technology. People who have difficulties perceiving visual content, folks like me who live rurally, so I have images turned off in my browser. And then really, when we put text on our images, we really bring some return on investment for SEO, for search engine optimization, because we've taken that image and we've made it into a scannable text that web crawlers can perceive. POUR is a high-level acronym that describes 4 levels of accessibility, and they stand for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Mostly today, we're going to look into perceivable, meaning that users can identify content by means of their senses, visually. And then we're going to talk about robust. This is the technology that people use to access your documents or your multimedia and other information formats. So to break it down, those 4 parameters, what makes content accessible? We want to make sure that it's easy to see. So we accommodate visual needs. The Center for Disease Control reports that 12 million people over the age of, I think, 38 live with some sort of vision loss. And that's including 1 million people who are, completely blind. But remember, there's other factors that distort our vision, like things like cracked cell phone screens or a glare from a window coming into your screen. So right here we see Milo Aukasson standing in front of an image of Milo on an album cover. We have our motor needs. We want to make sure that people can interact with our assets, so we accommodate motor needs. So this is people who might live with a palsy from Parkinson's, or maybe paraplegia from ALS, or an accident. But it could also be folks like me, with my child on a city bus and I only have one arm. This is a picture of Richard Allen of Def Leppard behind a drum set, and he has one arm. We want to make sure that it's easy to hear, so we accommodate auditory needs. When we address these things, we help individuals not only in noisy environments and quiet environments, when you don't have your headphones, but we also help our deaf and hard of hearing friends. And here you see the boys of the Beastie Variety with a boombox in front of them. And then the last parameter really is we want to make sure that people understand, so we accommodate cognitive needs. And this can be people who are distracted, have a difficult time focusing, people who are depressed, and people with neurological impairments as well. So here we see Susie from Susie and the Banshee sitting down looking very depressed. This is some quote I came across recently, and it really kind of hit me a lot. When you call something an edge case, you're really just defining the limits of what you care about. So when we don't add alt text, we're really sort of telling our consumers or the people accessing our information that we don't care about them. Assistive technology, I mentioned that when I talked about robust. Assistive technology are the things that we use to interact with our digital assets. It allows and really empowers people who live with low vision or cognitive or learning disabilities to access information and maintain privacy. That's an important part of using the web, is privacy. It removes a barrier to the internet or digital information. So there's screen readers, these convert text to speech. We should keep in mind that not only blind people or people with low vision use screen readers, but folks with cognitive challenges will use screen readers along with visuals on a web page. And this is a picture of a keyboard with a pair of headphones next to it. And I don't know about you, but it seems like websites fonts are getting smaller and smaller and smaller as I get older, and I keep hitting that command plus plus. So I want to talk about screen magnification software, and it's much to its name. We really use it to enlarge the screen content. So it's easier for us to read if we live with a partial sight impairment. It's used for people to enlarge the content. But also some of these screen magnifiers have text-to-speech functionality as well. We have alternative input devices. Some examples of these, for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to read them. We have head pointers, we have motion tracking or eye tracking, single switch entry devices. That can be something that's on a wheelchair through someone who is a quadriplegic. You have large print or tactile keyboards. You have speech input software. And these are really that alternative to the typical mouse and keyboard interactions for people with physical or cognitive disabilities. And a keyboard and a phone can be an alternative input device as well. Virtual reality, that's kind of cool. It's coming up. But we also have to think about being inclusive with our virtual reality, because it comes with new chances to include people with disabilities and make gaming more accessible. However, it also adds to the accessibility problem that can occur in games. It's a relatively new technology, new rules, and interactions and interaction forms still need to be developed, so something to think about when you're designing your product or when you're thinking about images in your virtual reality. This might be sort of a redundant slide, but there's a list of more assistive technologies. I mentioned eye trackers before. There's accelerators. They help reduce the risk or reduce the effort needed to type or click. You have pop-up and animation blockers. These are things that keep those annoying things from popping up. You have refreshable braille displays. These raise and lower the terminal care, how do I want to say it? Raising and lowering the dots and pins dynamically as text is read out loud. There's reading assistance. There's things that customize font size. There's tooltips. There's page maps. There's reading assistance. So I invite you to learn a little bit more about assistive technology. So who uses a screen reader? WebAIM does a survey every year to determine how and why users use screen readers. This is from their survey number 8. I'm not sure if survey number 9 came out yet this year, but they found that 87.6% use a screen reader because they live with a disability. So almost 90% of people use a screen reader because they're disabled. And of those, 71% rely on the screen reader audio alone. And here I have a graph that explains that has the graphic of 87.6% people using it for being disabled. In that same survey, they looked at mobile app usage over a website to access digital information. So you can see that more people slightly use a web app over a website. About 51, almost 52% prefer web apps over a website. And I'm going to take a moment to drink. But I also want to take a moment because there's still something going on in the Ukraine. And I want to, every time I listen to the news, it makes me think about things. And I really want people to take a moment to hold in light all the people in the Ukraine whose lives are in danger, but also like the people fleeing the Ukraine and the Russians who are shocked and dismayed at the course their government has taken. I'm a Quaker, so I believe that violence and war are never the only option. And that's my only political thing today, I promise. So now let's get into the fun stuff. We're going to talk about image types. But why do we love images? Well, you see, if you can see these images, they're really fun. They enhance our content, especially for people who live with cognitive or learning disabilities. We include images and media to support and add to the content that we have on our pages. People who live with low vision use images as cues to help orient themselves on the page. But media, including social media, use images for conversions because having images on your posts lead to a higher click-through rate and return on investment. So you get a higher ROI when you have an image on a social media post. So just kind of briefly describing, I've got an image of Devo, a cute image of Cyndi Lauper, a Van Halen album cover, and then the band Blondie in the foreground. But when we use images, we have to keep in mind that images can be major barriers when we don't take the time to make them accessible to people who can't visually see them. Accessible images benefit people who use screen readers. The text can be read aloud or rendered as Braille. People using speech input devices, or that can put a focus on a button or a linked image with a single voice command. The text alternative can be read aloud for people browsing speech-enabled websites. Mobile web users, like I said, images can be turned off. Maybe they're too distracting, or you're using roaming, or you live rurally, you have that poor data connection. And then again, that search engine optimization, those images now become indexable by search engines. So different image types. We've got simple images that convey simple information. We have decorative images that are purely decorative and add no new information to your page. And we'll be going over these again with images. CAPTCHAs, they confirm whether or not we're human. Images of text, I have really strong opinions about this, and you'll hear them later. But images of text display text that's intended to be read. We have groups of images where the text alternative for one image conveys the information for the whole group. Image maps, these can be things that contain multiple clickable areas. Complex images convey complex information. We'll talk a lot more about these. And functional images are used to initiate actions rather than to convey information. And what do we use images for? Of course, we use them to add, some value to our page, add like a little bit of emotion, add some color, but we also use them as links, as logos, as decoration, to help people orient themselves on the page. And sometimes we use them as buttons. So let's look at the first one I mentioned, simple images. So feel free when I ask questions to put it in chat and see what other people say, but we're going to kind of have a little bit of interaction here. How would you describe this image? Well, girl, it's true that images that convey simple information must be described with alternative text. Alternative text is like really for these are short, sweet description of the content, typically invisible to people who can see the image, but is exposed to those who are using those assistive technologies we talked about. The description should convey the content and the functionality of the image as concisely as possible to provide access to the content of the image without adding a ton of details. And this is for a simple image. You can go all out and describe the image in complete detail, but for simple images where it's just conveying a little bit of information or adding context, be mindful that if you're not succinct, people will not listen to the whole alternative description. So here we have, the Milli Vanilli brothers. So, and then we have headshots. We use these for professional photos sometimes. So in a headshot, it's a simple image. We want to include the person's full name, regardless of if you say their name in the surrounding text, please include their name in the alternative text. You want to say it's a headshot. By saying the image is a headshot, you convey a couple of different things to your content consumer. They're professional, they're likely wearing business casual, they're almost certainly smiling. You don't need to add more than that. But for an image like Madonna here, we're going to say that she's posing in a particular way, with her finger in her mouth. But you also don't want to over describe the person for something like a headshot. You don't have to describe everything, especially if assumptions are made around gender, identity, socioeconomic, sexual expression, race. You want to leave these descriptions out of your alt text for individual people unless it's truly communicating an important part of information that cannot be accessed any other way. And I'm not saying don't do it, but there's certain contexts where, everyone has their own opinion on this, but in a simple headshot, if that information isn't relevant, keep it as concise as possible. So decorative images. How would you describe this image? This is an album cover, and this is purely decorative. It does not convey any meaning, and there's several methods for telling a screen reader to ignore it. Sometimes decorative images are used for borders or stylings or corners, like little fleur-de-lures and things like that. So when can you really skip writing alternative text? I think, this is subjective, there are only two situations where an image can be considered purely decorative and does not need alternative text. If an image conveys absolutely no important information to the user to understand the page content, it can be considered decorative. Its only function is to enhance the appearance of the page. And then the second one is the information in the image is repeated on the page. But to be clear, these instances are rare. You will almost never have an image that does not need alternative text because your image is maybe evoking emotion. The color might make your content consumer feel a certain way. So really, if you have an image on your page, think about why you put it there, and you don't want to leave anyone out of that experience. And this is a Journey album cover. It's looks like kind of like a blown glass, like maybe a spaceship going up into the sky. Borders are decorative images. I would not put alternative text on this. This is maybe on stationery or something like that. But this is an example of when you would have a decorative image. Images of text. So take a stab at describing this image. Readable text is sometimes presented within an image. If the image is not a logo, we want to really try to avoid text in images. However, if images of text are used, we want to really 100% make sure that the text alternative contains the same words as in the image. But this is why, so using actual text is way more flexible than using an image. People can resize actual text without it losing any clarity or background, or the text colors can get modified, whatever to your user's preferences. So in situations where images of text cannot be avoided, the alternative text really needs to contain the same text as in the image. So here we have a Walkman with headphones on that reads the best 80s music, VH1's 100 greatest songs of the 80s. So I not only described the image part of it, but I also have the exact words that are in the image. So this is a logo. You know, every logo needs alternative text. Say the name or say that the image is a logo. Assistive tech does not understand the difference between logos and other images. So using the word logo helps your consumers understand the purpose. You know, follow it with the format, you know, organization name, following the format, organization name, logo. And then include any text in the image. Like all the other text of images, your alt text, again, should include all the words that are in your logo. So for here, this is the MTV logo. So you have the big M with the TV and it reads music television. But is your image also a link? Lots of times our logos link to other things. So if your logo is a link, there are practices for linked images as well, where you need to include where the link is going. And I'll talk about this some more. Groups of images. So how would you describe this image of star rating? Not necessarily the Fugazi album behind it, but the star rating. If multiple images convey one single piece of information, the text alternative for one image would convey the information for the whole group. So this group of 5 images combined shows a product rating. There's 5 images, right? There's 4 stars filled in, and one of them is the 5th star is almost all the way filled in. So what I would say on the first image is rating 4.7 out of 5 stars. And then all the other images I would leave empty or null. And just to be clear, this is a really great album, and I would never give it 4.7 out of 5. I would give it 5 out of 5. CAPTCHAs. Does anybody know what CAPTCHA stands for? I actually just learned this maybe a year and a half ago. So CAPTCHA stands for, it's an acronym, Completely Automated Public Turing Test to Tell Computers and Humans Apart. So it's a type of challenge used on websites to determine if your user is a bot. CAPTCHA. So CAPTCHAs confirm whether we're human. And when we first started seeing CAPTCHAs on the web, the first series of them were completely inaccessible. Not everyone can see the screen. And then think about it. If you added alternative text, it defeats the purpose of weeding out the machines, because then they're able to parse the alt text. So here we see a CAPTCHA where it says Guns N' Roses and sucks over on the side. And we see where you have to type the words, and then there's a CAPTCHA. This CAPTCHA is actually more accessible than the first group, because if you look, there's ability to, if you can't quite understand the words, you can mix up the words and have different words come up on the screen. There's a button where you can hit that, you can listen to the CAPTCHA and then type it in. Again, not everyone can see the screen. So we want to make sure we offer those alternatives like we saw on that last CAPTCHA. That way they're accessible for your entire audience, including vision, hearing, and neurocognitive disabilities. You know, best case, like really best practices is just not to have one single way to have a CAPTCHA. You know, sometimes a simple question, but if you think about it, sometimes people have dyscalculia. So sometimes the algebraic, you know, or the mathematical equations are too difficult for some people. So have a simple question in a checkbox maybe that says, "Are you human?" And in this CAPTCHA, you see that it says click the flower, and there's a grid of different images, and one of them being a flower. Complex images. So this is a complicated image. This is a Billboard chart from, oh no, it's not from the 80s. It's from 1991. Sorry. Okay, so we have a little bit of 90s mixed in here, but this is a very complex image. So when you have a complex image, like a graph, a chart, a diagram, it may contain too much information to be effectively used using alternative text. So the question to ask yourself is, given that current context, what information is intended to be communicated? that same information must be provided to people who are unable to see the image. So sometimes a long description can include like structure necessary to communicate that structure, maybe including headings, lists, data tables, identifying rows. These can be really challenging to have effective alternative text. And then we have infographics and memes. How would you describe this image? So infographics, these can be memes, they can be, movie posters, they can be show flyers. They communicate information to the user. Sorry, let me back up. You want to make sure that you communicate that same information to the people using the assistive technology. So include all of the text that occurs within the image. Consider removing the text from your image and inserting it on the text around the image. But these, your alt text will need to include all of the text that is included. And then again, taking into account the layout that we talked about, like with a chart and a graph. The order of information can be really crucial to understanding the message, and be sure to describe the layout of the graphic, such as where the text is placed in relation to the image, in addition to the whole of the content. So we have a Descendants show poster, and they're at the Whiskey for 5 nights. On one side, we have the dates with the bands that they're playing with. And then on the other side, we see Milo sitting on a pot with a magazine that says "Everything Sucks." Code. If you work in tech, you're very tempted to put images of code in your assets. But we want to use pictures of code sparingly. One reason is it's not possible to copy and paste when, like, say you're trying to like explain how to do something and someone wants to copy and paste. They can't do that with the image. So again, if you do have an image of code, that alt text should be exactly what your code is saying. Explain the code, have it line by line. Images of code blocks on a computer. This is an image of a code block on a computer. I don't need to read it out loud to you because it's completely decorative and really serves no purpose to this slide. Then we have functional images. And there's different rules around functional images that have to do around links and link purposes. Sometimes we use images as links, so we want to make sure that the purpose of the link is clear and that the users understand where they're going. So we have functional images like image maps. These contain multiple clickable areas. This can be an org chart. It can be a park map. It could be a decision tree. It could be a Google map. The text alternative for an image in there, like say one of those like image pins, the text alternative for that image should provide an overall context of the link and then describe on each link where that link is going to take the user. And linked images require alt text no matter what. And there's a couple of additional considerations for accessibility when we have these images that link out. You want to avoid saying link to or click to in the alternative text. Screen readers automatically identify all links by saying it's a link or a clickable graphic. So using link to or click to is redundant and confusing for those navigating the page with the screen reader. So again, say it's a pin and the pin leads to this specific web page. Just saying the URL is not helpful. So how would you describe this image? This is an icon. It's a functional image, and it's an image conveying a file format, an icon conveying information or images conveying a file format. So conveying information within the link text. So I kind of got that backwards. This is not a file format. This is a link an image of a link. So you want to explain that it's an image that where the link goes to, just the same as in that multiple clickable area, like the image map. We have an image used as a button. The image is used to give the button a distinct style. Right here, we see kind of 80s colors with a magnifying glass, and it's probably taking us to search. So we want to make sure that we explain that it's the search button. We have standalone icons that have function, such as this image of a printer. We know that if we hit this image of the printer, it will send our file to the printer. But people who don't see the image needs to know that that goes to the print function. It's a print function. And then I have some miscellaneous images I like to talk about because people ask me questions about them. How would you describe this image? It's a screenshot. Generally add visual explanations to text, so make sure that you explain that it's a screenshot and give the context of the screenshot. We have illustrations. Be sure to describe what adds value. Why is it important that it's an illustration or a drawing? This is an illustration of Madonna. We have some do's and don'ts. Kind of fly through these because I know I'm running out of time. Again, we don't want to begin with image of or picture of. Your users will already know that they're on the image, and usually that software assistive technology will read that. We don't want to use a file name like screenshot.jpg is not helpful at all. We don't want to be too wordy if it doesn't make sense in the context. We don't want to rely on artificial intelligence to tell us what's in that alternative text. They don't always get it right. And especially if there's mood involved, it's easier for a human to convey the mood. You don't want to use a space in your alt text. If it's a decorative image, you want to use the null, which is the two quotation marks next to each other. And we really want to avoid emoji icons in alt text. Just use plain text, free of symbols and icons, and any weird characters because they can be cumbersome. But we do want to describe the purpose of the image. If the location's important, if there's certain colors that make sense to describe to your users, what are the feelings? What are the emotions? What people are around? What animals are around? Is there a fence in the background that adds value? Anything that is actively happening. The WCAG documentation is sort of a one-size-fits-all guideline for authoring image descriptions. And we do need to keep in mind that they need to be responsive to the context in which the image is found. So I like to say that not all image descriptions are created equal. The same photo can appear on 3 different pages and require different alt text for each instance. The alt text for an image can vary depending on the context of the image, the role on its page, and the intended message. So this could be an image of a woman walking across a field. Other times it might be a woman walking across a field with smoke from explosions in the background, or it may be an image of a storm rolling in. So not all, like if you have the same image, it doesn't always have the same alt text from page to page. So here are some fun examples. What do you think of when you hear the phrase men with makeup? So we have this picture of men with makeup, and we have this picture of men with makeup. So a better description might be, the faces of the music group of Kiss in their stage makeup. In that second image would be David Bowie with a red and blue lightning bolt on his face. Same alt text, but very different pictures. So keep that in mind. We have the alt text Rio. Remember, this is 80s music. Hopefully I've got some fans out there. Rio. We've got this image of Rio, and we have this image of Rio. Both are Rio, but very different. So this would say something like the iconic statue of Christ the Redeemer looking over the city of Rio de Janeiro, and the other one would be Duran Duran's album cover by the artist Patrick Nagel. We have dead bug now. So here's a dead bug, and here's a dead bug. So to clarify more, this is a bug on a leaf carrying a stack of dead bugs on its back. And then we have a Volkswagen with a Grateful Dead logo on its hood. Both dead bugs, both very different images. Paul Revere. We have this Paul Revere, and then we have this Paul Revere. Again, both Paul Reveres, but that first one is really a statue of Paul Revere in a park on his horse. And the second one is the Def Jam record of Beastie Boys songs, Paul Revere and Its New Style. Flock of seagulls. We have this flock of seagulls and this flock of seagulls. Again, both flock of seagulls, but very, very different. So the first one I would describe as a flock of seagulls flying against a bright blue sky. And then the second one, I would have the band flock of seagulls posing with 80s styles, clothes, and hairstyles. We have AC/DC. So here's our first AC/DC, and here's our second AC/DC. Again, AC/DC, a tilde over a line, DC, a line over a dashed line, standing for AC/DC power. And then we've got the band AC/DC with Malcolm Young in the front. Oh, that's funny. Both flock of seagulls do have wings. Okay, so we have the Cure now. We have this image of the Cure and this image of the Cure. So again, someone holding a tray of pills, and then we have the Cure's Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me album with shiny red lips on the cover. So bottom line, be succinct. Be thoughtful of the information you're actually wanting to portray. Add the details that are relevant. Think about why you put the image there in the first place. And what is important for people who can access it visually. Those details you should share in the alt text for people who can't access it visually. I think I have a few more minutes. I have a thank you slide just in case, but I think I can like breeze through the last ones real quick. I want to thank Women Who Code because I really appreciate this is the second year I've been invited to talk, and I love sharing information about accessibility. Okay, so social media. Accessibility should be across all your platforms. So I have examples of different ways that you can add accessibility to your social media. But first, why is it important? Because 88% of screen reader users use a mobile device, and only 54% found social media somewhat accessible. So that goes back to that WebAIM survey. Only 53% of people found social media somewhat accessible. 16% found it very accessible. So a big win to bring up these percentages is increasing the accessibility of your images in social media. So there are ways, and the apps are starting to catch on, the platforms are starting to catch on, but you just have to really dig around in those accessibility settings to find them. So here we have, I don't use social media very much. I forget what platform this is. I'm sorry. This could be Twitter, but it doesn't look like it. But a search on the internet can usually yield very good results. And most of the time the apps have those accessibility settings. So in Facebook, you select the image, and then there's an edit button, and then you can add your alternative text. In Instagram, if you go into the settings, you scroll down and you hit accessibility. There's a button there to write alt text. And then, this one's in Twitter. So, I wonder what that first one was Twitter too. So here we have, how to add alternative text for a logo. So we have the caption, I have it up at the top, like in the description itself. If I wanted to add it in the actual text of of the tweet, or I can add it when I add a description. So there's two ways in all of these platforms to add the description. You can do it in the actual message of the text or into the setting of, describing the image. And then LinkedIn, again, you select the photo and then you add alternative text and you have 300 characters to be able to play with. And then Buffer and some of those platforms all have ways of adding alternative text too. So, when you pick your scheduling platform for social media, make sure that you have one that has all those choices of being able to add alt text to your images. Slideshows. Well, the first rule of slideshows is not to use slideshows, but they're predominantly displayed sometimes on people's website. So making sure that your slideshows are accessible are really important. So you can see in here, having accessible controls to push for people to be able to play, stop, and start. So providing those visual displays, because I'm talking about slideshows because these are places where we find images. Make sure that when people are using keyboards that they can focus on the controls, and that when they can get into the slideshow, they can get out of the slideshow. And back to those controls. In this picture, it's a picture of a wedding, but the controls are light gray over light gray. So be sure that those controls are visible. Remember the size and color and take into account. Make sure if it's on a mobile device that those controls are really large, provide very generous touch targets. And two, again, describe the image. And be sure to have a reasonable alternative to the slideshow. The slideshow does not need to function if people have style sheets disabled, but all of the content should still be available. So if we look at this image, the images are turned off, but there's no alternative text. So I have no idea what's happening with this slideshow. So again, add alternative text to each and every picture of the slideshow. And I know I'm at time now, so I'm going to stop and pause and take a drink. And I think I might have a couple minutes for questions, but maybe I went over.
I think we have time. I have it on my calendar. This is a full hour for this session.
Oh, I should have gone slower then. I thought it was 45.
I just wanted to make sure that we have this on the calendar. What a wonderful presentation. Just how that was really eye-opening personally for me. Just I had no idea all of the thought that went into this process. And I think other people were having that same response. And a lot of people are very interested. So for example, someone's wondering, so how do you get into the accessibility side of tech? And maybe you could couple that with telling us a little bit about your journey, how you arrived here
Sure. So I usually do that at the beginning, but I thought I had limited time. So I am actually a hospice nurse by trade. So I understand how some folks have very difficult times accessing information on the web. Through a series of life events, I am no longer, well, I'm still a nurse, but I moved careers and got into tech. And you saw my LinkedIn on Sutter. Yes, so I'm still working for Sutter. I was working at an agency and we were talking about things and it came up and it's like, wait, you can make your website accessible, but you don't? And then I was like, oh, I know that's my niche, right? Because I'm all about inclusion for people. And then later in life, actually just recently, I've come from being an able-bodied individual to a disabled person. I'm hard of hearing, I have a physical disability. And so accessibility is super important, not only in the physical world for me, but in the digital world too. And it's hard to talk about it without getting very passionate, right? Because when we think about diversity and inclusion, we don't always think about disability. We think about, race, we think about sexuality, we think about socioeconomics, we think about age. So when we think about including people, disability being disabled should be under that umbrella of D&I. And I forget what the original question was, but that's why I'm passionate about it, because I like everybody. You know, I come from a non-tech background and went into tech, and like this was like this like mind-blowing thing that people wouldn't make something accessible. I didn't understand it. Like, why wouldn't you include a quarter of the population, especially when it comes to art? You know what I mean? Like images, like it adds so much value to be able to look at something creative that someone did. And then you have the alt text of a picture. It's like that person doesn't get any of the same context that someone visually would get. So I talk a lot about like being succinct, but also, like I said, if that image is there for a reason, take your time and explain that image, you know, take your time to evoke that emotion. Say, oh, I talked about being succinct with a headshot, but say you come from a marginalized community and it's a wall of speakers on a website. It might be really important to include someone's race or someone's if they're blind on that headshot, because it adds context and people have that representation. So if you feel that detail is important enough to include, please include it. I know I always say be succinct, but again, it comes down to like having that same experience for someone who can't see it visually.
Do you know, when I was in my former role, I was overseeing book production, and I was working with a book team, and they were writing a book called Android Accessibility by Tutorials, and it was about accessibility. And I really love what the author said. She wrote that any responsible developer is thinking about accessibility, right? That they all should be thinking about it. And the original, thank you for sharing that, all of that, by the way. And the question was, did you have any tips? Like if someone, their interest is peaked here, where can they go from this presentation? If they're interested in going in this direction, maybe with their career. And also someone mentioned getting their own companies on board with these practices. Where can people go from this presentation?
So I don't know how many people are into social media or how you get your news and stuff like that. The first step is really that arming yourself with the information. Like a lot of my LinkedIn is people who are in the accessibility world, you know, and so I get a lot of information because a lot of my connections are in accessibility and they're posting great articles. So I go to that article and then I follow that newsletter. I follow their RSS feed and I just feed into that information. I make sure I follow things like, oh, if you do that QR code at the bottom, it's not the right for opensource.com, but the QR code next to LinkedIn, that's my LinkedIn. It's Volkswagen Chick. And that's actually, the link is wrong. It should be linkedin.com/IN/Volkswagen Chick. But if you type Volkswagen Chick, it'll come up. But I lost my train of thought. Oh, and then buy-in is hard. I now use it. I use my personal story. Like at my work, I am hard of hearing and I need captions. And it's a plight for me. Like I don't feel included because there's no captions on videos. So I tell my personal story about why captions are important. You know, sometimes if people don't know someone and it doesn't affect them personally, they don't care about it, which is kind of a weird thing, right? So really like building stories helps with buy-in, for stakeholder buy-in, but also it's the law. Like it's the law. You can get sued for not having an accessible website. And there's this new movement out where they talk about cross-functional teams, where it's not just the responsibility of like the accessibility advocate, but it's like everyone on the team. If you're learning, if you have to go in and learn CSS, the new CSS techniques every year, or you have to learn the new JavaScript techniques, or you have to learn the new, you know, how to design something every year. Well, accessibility is like that too. So everyone on the team should have this knowledge about their particular sect of accessibility. You know, not just your testers or your QA people. You know, the developers should know a little bit about accessibility. The designers should know a little bit of accessibility, the stakeholders. And so really having that cross-functional team helps with the whole team in general, because the onus isn't on just that one person, that lead. Because sometimes that lead can get like advocacy fatigue. So if you kind of split the responsibilities of between all of you, y'all build on your strengths and technique, or strengths and weaknesses, right? Like I'm not a good writer, so someone else is writing, but I can tell them when their content's not accessible. Or, you know, the designer will come in and like look at the color combinations, and the developer will make sure that there's, you know, fields that people can see when they're using a screen reader for filling out a form. So when it's everyone's responsibility, it takes the onus and kind of spreads it out.
Oh, wonderful. And I know we were really talking about alternative text here, but someone had asked, are there ways to make the overall function of a website more accessible? Are there features that make it harder for a person with disabilities to use a site?
So I do, because I love talking about accessibility. I have like a list of really quick wins. So one of them being like, put your mouse away, you know, take it off your desk, don't use your trackpad, and use the tab key and see if you can get to the tab key and the arrows and the enter button, and see if you can get to all of the different places on the website, because some people can't use a mouse. They're using a single switch, right? So if you can use the tab key and get to everywhere where you need to go, that's a good test for accessibility. If you have alternative images, that's a good one. If you have modals or menus that open up and you can get to them from the keyboard, but you can't get out, that's called a keyboard trap. So anything that, like a pop-up, if a pop-up comes up, think about like, okay, I'm tabbing through it and there's this X. Are you making your users tab all the way through the web page and that's the last button? Well, they're going to leave your web page because they can't close the little subscribe to your newsletter thing. You know, color contrast is a good one. Underlining links. Links are really, they shouldn't be identified by color alone. Links should have like two sort of properties to them so people know that they're a link. But I always tell people, remember Craigslist and how accessible Craigslist was? Just underline your link and everyone knows that it's a link, you know? So those are some kind of quick wins. Making sure your forms make sense, making sure that you have help text, making sure that people know where they are on the page. So if you're tabbing through the page, we have like this highlight that kind of comes up as you're tabbing, like say you're tabbing through all of the headshots. Where am I? I don't know, but having an outline as you tab through is good to keep people for allowing people to know where they are on the page.
It's wonderful. And I think we should wrap up in another couple of minutes. So if there's any final thoughts, and I'm sure like we can reach out to you on your LinkedIn as well. Let's say you're just a developer on your own, you're just working on your own, you don't have a team to check your work. Do you know of any tools? I know someone just posted a contrast checker. Are there any tools that someone can use or to test their site to see if they're meeting accessibility standards?
So I work for opensource.com, so I'm supposed to use open source tools, but there is a browser extension from Site Improve that's free. And you see it up on the toolbar and you click on it and it will give you kind of a report of what's wrong with your web page, but it also tells you what to manually check for. So Site Improve is this great tool because it not only tells you the errors, but tells you what to manually check for. Let me see if I can.
I've got it. I've got that.
Oh, okay.
Fast.
The Wave evaluation plugin is great. I do not like Lighthouse because not that I do not like Lighthouse, but Lighthouse gives you a false sense of that your website is accessible because they don't have as much programmed in. Because when you use automated tools, they're only as good as what they have programmed, and Lighthouse is one of those kind of lightweight ones. So if you use Lighthouse, make sure. Oh, Axe Dev Tools is a good one. Yep.
Wonderful.
So, yeah.
You've given us so much to think about. I can tell just from the activity in the chat that everyone's really excited to take the insights that you've given us away. And thank you so much for your time and for the work that you're doing in the community about this topic. It's incredible. So thank you so much.